a place to start might be at the beginning, why we thought that a biosphere reserve would be a good option out of the other ways of conserving regions. Because the Mageliesberg is an interesting area in that it's got enormous pressure from, it's very close, 50 k's from the big conurbations of Johannesburg and Pretoria, and huge pressure to settle here, to develop it, to build condominiums. And if one goes to Hartbeespoort Dam, you can see very extensive and very economically important developments taking place. So you've got this huge pressure to develop it economically, which in my book is not a bad thing, provided it doesn't detract from the ecological issues. On the other hand, it is an extremely valuable region from an ecological point of view on three grounds. One is geologically it is unique. The Bushveld complex is unrepeated anywhere in the world. The deposits of platinum are the largest in the world along that Bushveld complex. The uplifting of the mountains was a unique occasion in the whole history of the planet, and that was 3 billion years ago. Where we're sitting now in the middle of dolomite is a completely different way that the landscape was created. This landscape was created by bacteria. Cyanobacteria generated calcium carbonate as a byproduct of their photosynthesis. It also released oxygen into the air, which is lucky for those of us who breathe. Otherwise, life could never have evolved. So we've got two totally different landscapes geologically. One created by a microbe, and the other created by massive seismic activity that is almost unimaginable in modern times. So that's the first thing. The geology of the place is unique. The second thing is the biodiversity is unique because we've got rolling grasslands coming in right down from the center of southern Africa, from the Free State area, right up to here. We would get grasslands. Other side of the mountains, we get bushveld, the savanna, which goes up into North Africa. And then in little pockets still, there is still Afro-montane forest. So we've got three biomes coming together, and that in itself has given it a tremendously rich biodiversity because it draws species of plants and animals from all three of those biomes, particularly the grassland and the savanna. And if you look at a field guide to anything, mammals, birds, whatever, you'll see how many species either come down from the north as far as the Mageliesberg and no further, or from the south up to the Mageliesberg and no further. But both of them occur in the Mageliesberg. Now that wealth of biodiversity drew explorers into this region, and people like Cornwallis Harris came here because the rumor was out that this was an incredibly biodiverse place. You can almost say that him and Andrew Smith of the Cape Town in the 1820s were the first tourists, eco-tourists, to come into the Mageliesberg. Certainly their writing, their ancient or 200-year-old books brought tourism into this region and brought other explorers and brought science into this region. So that brings us to the third of the big things in this area, which is its history. But of course they weren't the first by a long way. The history predates hominids, it predates human beings. So we've got a history of human life evolutionarily through the early Stone Age, Middle Stone Age, Late Stone Age. All of those tools are here, and etchings done by Late Stone Age people, which are not fully understood. That's one of the Biosphere projects, is to actually look at those etchings and hear something more about them, try and learn something about them. So right through those ages, then we get these Tswana settlements, which came in about 1200 to 1300 years ago, bringing a cattle culture into this area and settlement. The previous people here were nomadic and didn't ever settle in other areas, except maybe for spiritual reasons for short periods of time, which is possibly the origin of those etchings. Now we get permanent settlement and walled cities, not even towns. Cities, Carruthers, for example, was bigger than Cape Town at the time that it was built, bigger in terms of population. Now that demands tremendous things on the structure of the town. I mean, just the infrastructure. How do you populate? I think it was something like 18,000 people, bigger than the population of Cape Town at the time. They had to be accommodated, and they were obviously accommodated satisfactorily. Then you get the waves of invasion from the Griqua, from the Zulu, and Mzilikazi himself, who settled this area, had a wonderfully powerful kingdom, got a lot of bad press because he was a powerful chief, and therefore at the time thought to be vicious, but actually he must have been an extremely good leader because he led his people and successfully led the whole region from the what is now the Vaal River to the Limpopo River, and that was his kingdom in the 1820s. He was driven out by the Griqua and the Voortrekkers, who then brought a new phase of history into the area, being the white settlement of the region. The Anglo-Boer Wars, both were fought. This was a very important theatre of war during the Anglo-Boer War, and there's still fortresses and relics of that. So we have this unbelievable combination of interests, biological, geological, and historical, in the region. Now, we also have, as I said, a very strong desire for people to live here and develop, and we have the mines. The mines are important, critically important, in a country that needs economic development. It's no good saying you guys are horrible and you pollute the ground and so on, because they're critically important. That battle between development and conservation has been going on all of my lifetime. I joined the battle in about the 1970s or late 70s, early 80s.
On which side?
Well, I joined on the green side, you see. And gradually I thought, oh, hang on, these other guys have got a point. Socially, the country needs economic development. And as you know, biosphere reserves came into South Africa in the 90s, late 90s in fact, particularly in the Western Cape. And I thought, hell, here possibly is the solution to this insoluble problem. And so I thought about this idea. I spoke to the Kruger Canyons people, whom I knew. We spoke to the Waterberg people, and later we got in touch with the Western Cape people and said, how does this thing all work? And I put forward the idea to what was called the Mageliesberg Conservation Society. Well, in fact, it still is called Conservation Association. And said, why don't we try and develop a biosphere? And nobody knew what it meant. I could hardly spell the word. I mean, I knew nothing about it. But we gathered information on how to do it. And we got in touch with the province, the Northwest provincial government, and gradually over a period of 9 years, the thing eventually was registered, as you know, last year. We're still at the very early beginnings of it. And biospheres, we all know, are project-driven. They will work if there are good projects. They will fail if there aren't good projects. So projects really haven't evolved well yet, but there are some good ones coming up. But a lot of the stuff that we're talking about is in the future, and a lot of it needs funding, which we don't have at all. The one area that I'm finding a lot of success with is tourism, because tourism doesn't need funding. It needs philosophical direction, responsible tourism, but it is a self-sustaining industry. And it also combines, if it's well done, it combines this development need and employment need and economic development with environmental concern, and because they're dependent on the environment, the natural environment, for the attraction of their tourists. So we've been working very hard with the tourist industry, which is massive in this part of the world. It's second only to the Western Cape. There are something like 800 tourist venues, everything from bed and breakfast to big hotels, restaurants, boating operations and things like that. So there are hundreds of these things.
Is it domestic or international tourism?
It's a bit of both. The domestic, by far the greater part of it, but they're cultivated. And of course the biosphere is the key to the international visitors, because international people want to come to an area that they believe is green and positive from an environmental point of view. So there were, until recently, there still are, 4 tourism associations. One around Hartbeespoort Dam, which is the biggest of them, one around Rustenburg, which is pretty big, one at Buffelspoort, and one south in this cradle part of the world. Those 4 people, or 4 associations, worked competitively, very aggressively, almost against one another very often, and certainly the individual tourist operations were individual. Now we have at last got the biosphere to say you've got an umbrella of a destination marketing tool, and this is what it's all about. Come together, and they have formed a cluster of tourism associations, all now working together on common routes, common cause, bring the tourists into this region for good, environmentally positive reasons, and then have a battle about your bed and breakfast is better than my bed, or mine is better than yours. That's fine once they're here, but market the place as a biosphere attractive region, and it's working treat. We've got the cluster working together. We had a meeting yesterday, and they've had several before that, working as a team of people who have this common interest. We're developing training programs for tourist operators at 3 levels, down at the ordinary cleaner staff, the ordinary staff, and telling them what a biosphere is, what it means to be working in a hotel that is in a biosphere. So that, first of all, that they know, but also they can tell their guests, who are likely to ask the waiter, by the way, what's this biosphere business all about? And the waiter has good information to feed them. Middle management, who deal with things like marketing programs and stuff like that, they have a different training program, and at their level, about how to market a biosphere and how to market a common region. And then top management who own the places and need to know what their responsibilities are, social responsibilities as well as environmental responsibilities, and how to keep them responsible operations so that they don't actually conflict. And now we're starting things with competitors between them, not competing for visitors, but for competing how well they're matching environmental protection with economic development. And that's the next sort of key that we're going to. So that tourism drive is an important one.
You said that it was one of many options to preserve the area. What were the other options?
Historically, there have been some very interesting ones. In the 1970s, when really people began to realize that development was damaging the environmental aspects of this area and would in fact be self-destructive because we wouldn't have a decent place for people to come. A government under the old National Party government, they proclaimed this a game reserve. They were going to put a fence around. They were going to evict all of the landowners, of which there are about 400 or something. I mean, it was an absolutely impractical, stupid idea. But what it did do was psych up the local population tremendously. We had blood all over the floor at meetings in the 70s and early 80s, and eventually came up with a second option, which was not to fence. I mean, fencing it off was just a stupid thing. The next option was to create a protected area, which has been through several cycles of legal standing, but in those days it was called a protected environment, I think, and it had certain very limited constraints on the landowners, but the landowners retained ownership of their land. They were not evicted and turned into a game reserve. But it just meant that you couldn't put a building up of more than 2 meters, you couldn't fence some areas, you couldn't put a pipeline. It was quite limited constraints. And very soon, those constraints were being broken. People found their way around them. The EIA legislation wasn't very strong in the 80s and even into the 90s. That only came quite recently. So that began to fall apart as well. And in fact, we were losing the mountain. The other thing was a lot of farmers said, look, we've been here for 200 years. Don't come tell us how to protect the land. The only reason it's here and is nice is that we've protected it. Get off. And so, because they wouldn't come into that protected area, the protected area boundaries were shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. And what is now the core area of the biosphere, the strip along the top of the mountain, is actually very narrow. In places it's less than 1 kilometer wide. It's 200 kilometers long, but it's a thin little strip. That is one of the 2 core areas. The other is the cradle. Now, that was obviously going awry. And then with the new government and the split into 2 provinces, we no longer had an authoritative province. We had 2 provinces governing the same protected region. And to be quite frank, the whole protective status fell between the 2 stools. Neither took any interest in it, whatever. And there was a huge amount of corruption in the early 90s, late 90s. People doing things that were absolutely violating everything, but there was no consequence to it. And it was at that stage that we said, oh, we've got to find a new idea. And the new idea was the biosphere.
So how did that happen? I mean, do you remember the day when you suddenly thought, was it a visit to another biosphere? Was it something online? Or how did that happen in your lab?
I can't remember the day. I can remember the period, which was 2006. I had a friend who was very big in the K2C, the Kruger Canyons biosphere, and she said to me, biospheres are quite a good idea for your problem. I had been involved in this conservation of the Mageliesberg for a very long time, and she knew my angst and my concerns. And she said at one stage, biosphere mightn't be a bad option for you. They were struggling with theirs. They were just at the beginning stages of their own. Another friend of mine, Clive Walker, was starting the Waterberg biosphere. He also said, this is a new way of looking at things. So I learned from them what it might entail. But I then took it to the Mageliesberg Protection Association. Paul Fatty, I don't know if you've interviewed Paul, but he is now running with the thing, and he has always been very supportive of the whole idea of combining development with conservation, or at least negotiating between the two instead of just having a flat war. Because the flat war will result in the environment losing. We have a social structure in this country, or social situation, which will not allow pure environmental conservation in a sort of pristine way to survive. We've got too many pressures on it. So there has to be a negotiation and a working out. And that's what biospheres do. That's what they're good at. And what I think they're also good at is exchanging information, because we have the benefit of not only the other 7 biospheres in South Africa, but the other 600 and something in the rest of the world, all of whom communicate their successes and their failures and say, we tried this, it didn't work, we tried that and it's successful, do this, do that. We ourselves are gradually building up a repertoire of success stories, and I think we've got a little repertoire of failures as well. I'm sure we will probably find more of them as we go along. But it's beginning to work. I don't think it's a panacea for everything. I think it's going to be very demanding on a lot of people to make it work and to understand it. And that's perhaps our first port of call, is to get the understanding of what it's about. It's not pristine conservation in the old sense, but it's negotiating between those two absolutely irreconcilable difficulties that we're faced with.
What do you think the most misunderstood part is?
It depends which side you're on. I think the Green lobby has got a misunderstanding that this is a platform for protest. This is an authoritative body that's going to say you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that. And of course it isn't. It's a negotiating platform, if anything. So getting people to understand that this isn't... I mean, I have been asked by hundreds of people, when is the Biosphere going to be on board? Because we've got to slam this guy who's building a hotel in the wrong place or something. The answer is no. The Biosphere is not going to help that very much, the Biosphere Reserve. It's going to be a platform on which we can negotiate, but also the other very important thing, it's a platform on which there is an international spotlight all the time. We're performing under the world watching us through UNESCO. So we've got that amount of authority, but of course we have South African biospheres have no legal authority beyond the laws of the land that are there already. We've got to be in a position of strength and negotiation, and the strength will come from, just as it did with the tourism, it's the binding together of interested parties. I was talking to the mining people the other day about, you are the bad guys. I mean, not only have you messed the environment up, but you're shooting your labor. Everybody hates you at the moment. Why don't you start an information process, not just a center, not just a visitor center, but a process of informing people about what the positive things are that you do. And let's put that up and say, well, yes, we've got a big hole in the ground and it's very ugly, but here are the compromises, here are the trade-offs for that. And they're listening.
Do you think it is as, I don't want to use the word simple, but do you think it's a case of this is what we do badly, but this is also what we do well? Or do you think the biospheres have a role to play in actually making those stakeholders do things better?
Unquestionably the latter. They have, and one of the things that you've just said concerns me a little bit. The biosphere will do it. Who actually is the biosphere? Now, in my view, it is all of the stakeholders. I didn't make myself available to sit on the board of the Biosphere, for example. I'm not on the board. But I do believe that I can make a difference off the board. And so can every other person who lives or even doesn't live in the Biosphere Reserve. They can contribute. What we need to do is get people to understand it. So there's this educational process to bring everybody on board. The board, the board that has been constituted formally, I think it's got 10 or 12 members or something, can't do everything on their own. It's not physically possible. They will coordinate things, I think. And again, they haven't even started much, but they've just been selected recently. But they've got a job of, I think, coordination. They've got a job of marketing. They've certainly got a job of fundraising, because, as I said, tourism is the only thing that can work without funds. We've got to find funds for other stuff. Research, academic research, is huge in this area. We've got, I don't know how many universities, but the Wits, Johannesburg, Pretoria, I don't know, there's probably about 6 universities who have got postgrad students working in the biosphere, not even aware that they're working in the biosphere, but we're knitting their research together into a way in which to make their findings accessible to the ordinary people. Because I think I've certainly had experience of people being very proud of the fact that there are people working on sable antelope in the Khashwani Game Reserve, for example, who are discovering things about the species. It's a real icon of an animal, it's a lovely thing, and they're doing stuff there. There's a guy working on leopards, and his story is wonderful to tell. It's the story of how a leopard got snared, and they took it into the vet and helicoptered it out, and they repaired it, found that it was a female pregnant, took it back into the wild. She's had cubs, all on yards of video, and it's a lovely story. That's the sort of popular end of it. The scientific end of it is also very interesting, as they're learning about leopard ranges and how females are ranged, and also they're learning a lot about conservation and the whole business about getting snaring and informal hunting out of the region. So there's a lot of combination of that. Hart Reo, I don't know if you're familiar with the Hartbeesfontein radio astronomy place here in the Mageliesberg. It was built by the Americans in the 70s to plot satellites and track satellites. It had a lot to do when they were landing people on the moon. This had a major role. Then they abandoned. They actually gave it to, I don't think they even sold it. They gave it to the CSIR, and they are anxious now. They're doing radio telemetry and radio. You might know that, I can't remember the term, geotech something or other. It is the measurement of things like tectonic plate movement on this Earth by bouncing radio waves off other planets and back again. So you can measure, that we've moved away from America all of about 2 centimeters in my lifetime. That can be measured. So they're doing that kind of research. But they're very open to education. And people can go there and they show school parties and things, how all of that works. So there's that institution as well. So the science in this place is another whole aspect of it. This is I think all biosphere reserves are complex. I'm sure they all have got different aspects to it. But I don't know of any that I know very much about that are as complex as ours. It's got so many facets, as I started with, biology, geology, and history, combined with scientists working here, conservationists working here, property developers working here, mining. There's just such a complexity of difficult things to get to grips with. And we've got this instrument. Somebody at the tourism meeting yesterday, we had a big meeting of the tourism associations yesterday, and one of the chaps got up and he said, the biosphere is a gift. It has come to us in the tourist industry as an absolute gift. It's given to us for nothing, but it is the best marketing tool we've had in all of our tourism careers. And I thought, boy, you've got it. You've just said something that I wish I'd thought of saying, because that's what it is.
And now, is that boy attaching the responsibilities that come with that?
Yes, he is. Actually, that particular individual is very close to the whole biosphere conservation notion, and, as you say, the responsibilities that are entailed, because the whole theme of this association is responsible tourism. Under the responsible tourism banner, there is an organization called Responsible Tourism, which is a combination of social and ecological balance, and not taking out more resources than there are available naturally and are replaceable. So that I think they're taking a very good view. I'm terribly positive about this biosphere. But I always caution by saying it's going to be very demanding, and you're going to have to be very smart and think smart as to how to make it work. But if we can think smart, what a gem. It's really going to be very valuable.
So if I come to the restaurant here and you're my waiter and I ask you, what is a biosphere?
Yeah.
And my food's getting cold.
Yes. That's right. Well, that's exactly what he should be. I'm quite sure that if you said it today, you wouldn't get a decent answer, or no, I would say no waiters are clued up yet. But the intention is that they should become so.
This is not hypothetical. You're my waiter and I've just asked you the question.
Right now, I'd say, I don't know. I heard about it. I think my boss knows. That's what will happen now. And that, of course, is fatal. That's not going to help the biosphere. It's not going to help the tourists who ask the question either. They want to know. So little publications on the bedside table in the bed and breakfast, for example, are just one thing that you can do. training people is the other, the formal training and getting people close. But right now we've got a long, long way to go before that is something that is commonplace.
What do you think your biggest challenge is in terms of making the biosphere what you envision it to be?
I think it's education, or information and education is the biggest thing, because lots and lots of people don't know that they even live in a biosphere. Even though we've had public meetings and we've done all the right things, there are hundreds of people. I met a farmer the other day who's right in the heart of the thing. Part of his farm is in the core area, and he hadn't heard about the biosphere. And I said, of course, where have you been? Which planet were you on last? And so we've failed in that. It took us 10 years to get the thing registered, and I think our focus was, we did public opinion stuff, but our focus was in getting the registration done. We've got to shift that focus now. We've got to say, thanks, we're registered, thanks UNESCO. Hang back a while we teach people, or let people know. Actually, I hate that word, teach. I don't want to teach people. I want them to be excited and say, do you know where I live? I live in a biosphere. And in 10 seconds I'll tell you what it is. And they do. That's where I think we have to win. And all of these other things are integral into that.
And you guys also sit in quite an exaggerated position being across two provinces. What is the relationship between politics and biosphere?
Bad. It's one of the things that is a problem. I don't think it's a bigger problem than the educational one I've just mentioned, but it is a huge snag. The provinces do not communicate very well. Worse than that, there are silos within the provincial administration. Tourism department in the Northwest Province doesn't talk very much to the environmental department in the Northwest Province. They have to be coaxed together by non-government people who say, hey guys, we're having a meeting, you must both come to the meeting. And so we need to fuse those. The problem between the two provinces is an interesting one. I don't know why it deteriorated, because some years ago it was much better. When we started on this whole biosphere idea, we put together a steering committee with both provinces represented. And Gauteng and the Cradle in particular were very active on that committee. They did this and they did that, and they joined with the other Northwest people, and everybody was living happily, I thought, happily ever after. Then Gauteng sort of deteriorated in their interest. I think maybe the Cradle, which is part of the biosphere, but because it's a World Heritage Site, it's probably attracting their focus, or focusing their minds more, but they have fallen away from the thing. And you know that there was a delay in getting our registration because Gauteng actually pulled out at one stage. Or they didn't pull out, they fell out. They hadn't signed the endorsements and things. They just hadn't got around to it, and some of their officials and their politicians said, we've never heard of this place. They've had people on the steering committee for 9 years, but they hadn't heard of it for some reason. So there are political issues.
So, but now going forward, in terms of the model, in terms of the purpose, what role do biospheres have to play in politics, and what role does politics have to play in the biosphere as a stakeholder as well?
I think the one thing that the biosphere, and this is one thing that the board will have to do, I think, more than anybody else, and that is talk to government and get government to understand the benefits to government. We've got a list of all the benefits to farmers, benefits to this, benefits to that, benefits to government, which are substantial. Governments, can do well out of this biosphere notion, indeed. So there is that thing, but government has to be split into its spheres of influence. Our biggest job, and it's now almost non-existent, but it's very good in the Cape, for example. Our situation with local government is very weak. We need to go and say, in your IDPs, you've got to build in the fact that this is a biosphere, and this is what it means to plan. An integrated development plan. And every municipality in the country has to have one, and they have to renew it. I think it's every 5 years or 3 years. I think it's 5 years. They renew this thing. And basically an IDP says, it zones the area and says, we're going to have high development here, we're going to have an economic hub over here, we're going to plan the city, the municipality and its growth, and this is going to be rural, and this is going to be protected, and all that sort of stuff. Now, those plans get churned out usually by a consultant, not by the officials concerned, and the biosphere hasn't played a role in that at all in the planning. We must get on. We must know the dates when they're going to be doing the plan, because there's no good coming when the plan has been submitted, and you can imagine it's a bureaucratic thing, it goes through this cycle and that cycle, come to the end of it and you say, have you got a budget of R1 million because this is going to be the Biosphere region and we'll need to do something there, put signage up or something. And they say, no, it's not in the plan. So what we need to do very urgently actually is get into those municipal plans and set it out and say this is what the impact of the biosphere will be, and this is how it benefits your municipality. It doesn't reduce your rates, which is the reason some of them actually backed out originally and then had to be brought back again. So it's not challenging your authority even. You have the same authority. But it actually helps your planning and shows you productive ways of planning development and environmental issues.
The last question, the one you brought up quite a few times. In 10 to 20 seconds, what is a biosphere?
It's an area where people try to, within the constraints of the natural resources, try to live and prosper. That's my definition of it. And the reason how the method that they use is research, education, and sharing information. So they've got to marry these two things that are normally in conflict, and in fact since the 1940s, maybe earlier, we have not been actually living within the limits of our natural resources. We have a biosphere, which is the skin of the earth, which has got air, water and earth in it. That's all we've got. All the Hubble telescopes and the deep science stuff has not found one molecule of life anywhere else, or one resource that we can use other than sunlight anywhere else in the universe. So we're stuck with this little balloon, the skin around the earth, and we're using the resources faster than we can replenish, or than they can replenish themselves. If we fail to reverse that, we're going extinct, frankly, and it'll take a long time, but we will do that. We will accomplish utter self-extinction. Now, that's not a nice way to go, so let's work out ways. And so biospheres are experimental areas where we look for ways that you can blend those two. For the first million years of our existence, we did blend them, or we didn't do enough damage to not blend them. Now we've got to be a lot more positive or active rather than passive about not destroying the environment. And you've got to prosper, because you can't live in poverty either. You can't tell a guy, you're going to be poor for the rest of your life because we're saving the environment. He's going to say, up yours, I'm not going to, I'm not going to be poor. I'm going to have luxuries. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to dig up the land. I'm going to do all sorts of things. I'm going to make money. And we've got to accommodate that somehow. And it's not an easy solution. Not an easy solution. But biospheres are the experimental region where you can at least look for ways and work on ways of doing that.